She convinced me to sign over our $200, $0 family business after promising it was for our future, only to find out she's been secretly selling off our property and hiding $500, $0 in offshore accounts. Now she's trying to bankrupt me in court to keep it all. Hello everyone. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin the video. Using a throwaway for obvious reasons, with certain specifics modified to preserve anonymity. I never thought I'd be the guy writing a story about how I got completely by the woman I loved and trusted. Honestly, it feels like I was living in some bad soap opera, only it was real and I was the one getting played. It all started with small signs, little things that I brushed off at first, missed calls, late nights, strange texts, but I didn't want to see the truth. I was blind because I wanted to believe in the life we built together. Her name was Jessica. She was beautiful, long hair, piercing blue eyes, the kind of woman who could turn heads anywhere. We'd been married for 10 years, and for the most part I thought we had a decent life. We owned a successful family business, a small manufacturing company that brought in about 200 grand a year. We had a house in the suburbs, nice cars, the usual stuff. I worked hard to keep everything afloat, and Jessica was the one who handled the books and the finances. She was smart, ambitious, and she always seemed so dedicated to our future, or so I thought. Looking back now, I realize I was pretty naive. I believed her when she told me she was committed, that she was doing everything for us. But the cracks started showing about a year ago. She'd be out late more often, claiming she was meeting clients or running errands. Her phone was glued to her hand, and she'd get defensive whenever I asked about it. I'd catch her in little lies, like when she said she was at a friend's house, but I'd find her texts with some guy from her gym. Nothing blatant at first, just enough to make me suspicious. Then came the biggest shock of all. It was a Thursday night when I decided to surprise her at her usual after-work coffee shop. I wanted to talk about the upcoming quarterly reports, maybe plan a weekend getaway. I had no idea that what I was about to find would change everything. I parked my car and walked in quietly, expecting to see her with her usual latte, chatting with her friends. Instead, I saw her with a guy, Jake, a guy from her gym, I later learned. They weren't just talking, they were kissing, right there in plain sight. I froze, my stomach twisting. I didn't want to believe what I was seeing, but there they were, lost in their own world, oblivious to my presence. I felt a cold rage surge through me. I backed out slowly, not wanting to be caught starring. I waited until I got home to process what I saw. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing. How long had this been going on? How many times had I missed the signs? The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt even more was the sense of helplessness. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, like my entire world was crumbling around me. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep pretending. Everything was okay. I needed answers. I confronted Jessica that very day. When I asked her about the guy at the coffee shop, she immediately started lying, saying he was just an old friend, that I was reading too much into it, but I had proof. I'd taken a picture of her and Jake kissing. When I showed her, her face turned white and she started yelling. She told me I was overreacting, that I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. She called me possessive, insecure, but I knew better. I saw her lying through her teeth. Her reaction was so dismissive, so bitchy, that it made my blood boil. She didn't even try to deny it at first. Instead, she accused me of snooping, of not trusting her, of ruining everything because I was insecure. That's when I realized she'd been lying about a lot, about her meetings, her late nights, her phone calls. I found receipts, hotel bills, even bank statements showing deposits from offshore accounts. That's when I knew this was bigger than just a cheating affair. Jessica was hiding something serious, money, assets, who knows what else. It hit me hard. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, was capable of lying to my face, cheating on me, and secretly stealing from our own family. It's like she'd been planning this all along. I felt sick, betrayed, and furious. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. How could I have missed all the signs? How could she do this to me after everything we'd been through? I thought I knew her, but it turns out I was just fooling myself. The trust I had in her evaporated in an instant. replaced by a cold, burning anger that I knew would drive everything from now on. After I found out about the affair and the offshore accounts, everything changed in an instant. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the moment I saw her with Jake, the way she lied to my face, the way she dismissed my concerns like I was some paranoid fool. It was like a punch to the gut every time I closed my eyes. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious, all at once. For years, I had poured myself into that business, into making our life perfect, and now I was staring at a woman who had been secretly selling off our property and hiding $500,000 in offshore accounts. It was like I'd been played for a fool. The next morning, I didn't even bother pretending to be okay. I called my lawyer first thing. I needed to understand what I was dealing with legally because I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. The evidence I had was damning. The offshore accounts alone could be worth millions, and she'd been funneling money out of our business for months. I realized she convinced me to sign over our entire $200, $0 family business a few months ago, promising it was for our future, that it would help us expand and secure our retirement. Instead, she used that to cover her tracks, to sell assets, to hide her money. I felt like a complete idiot for trusting her. When I confronted her with everything, she didn't even try to deny it anymore. Instead, she doubled down, throwing tantrums and calling me insecure, controlling, jealous. She told me I was ruining her reputation, that I was just paranoid about her business trips and late nights. I knew she was lying. Her phone was filled with messages from other men, from Jake, from some guy named Tyler she'd been seeing at her gym. She claimed I was overreacting, that I had no proof she was cheating, even though I had the pictures and bank statements. The woman was a master at lying, twisting everything to make herself seem innocent. The emotional toll hit me hard. I felt like I was losing my mind. One minute I was furious, ready to end it all, and the next I was just devastated. How could she do this? How could she betray me after all these years? I'd always been the stable one, the one who kept everything together, our business, our home, our family. And now I was staring down the barrel of losing everything because of her greed and selfishness. I felt sick thinking about how she'd been secretly selling our property behind my back, draining our savings, and hiding it all in offshore accounts. She convinced me to sign over the business, promising it was for our future, but she'd been secretly stripping us of everything. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her get away with this. I started gathering all the proof I could find, bank statements, emails, messages, photos. I even hired a private investigator to look into her offshore accounts. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. She was planning to bankrupt me in court, trying to keep all the money she'd stolen and hide. I realized she'd been doing this for months, maybe years. She played the long game, and I'd been too blind to see it. In the meantime, I kept my cool around her. I didn't want to give her any reason to accuse me of anything or escalate the situation further. But inside, I was boiling. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I thought I knew, and it was like looking at a stranger, someone cold, manipulative, and entirely self-serving. The betrayal cut so deep it was hard to breathe. I'd been so trusting, so naive. I thought we were building a future, but she'd been building her own empire of lies behind my back. Now I was standing at a crossroads. Do I fight for the marriage, or do I cut my losses and walk away? The betrayal had shattered whatever trust we had left. I knew I couldn't stay with her, not after what I'd seen and uncovered. But the thought of starting over, of losing everything I'd worked for, was terrifying. Still, I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd been planning to ruin me in court, trying to keep all the stolen money and assets for herself. That was the final straw. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not without a fight. By the time I had all the evidence gathered, screenshots of her texts, bank statements showing deposits from offshore accounts, and the pictures of her with Jake, I felt like I was holding a ticking time bomb. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to save what was left of my life and my business. I went straight to my lawyer that afternoon, and we spent hours going over everything. The lawyer told me I had a solid case for fraud, embezzlement, and possibly even criminal charges if I decided to pursue them. But what I really wanted was to hit her where it hurt, the court, and most of all her. Jessica's reaction when I confronted her that second time was even more revealing than the first. She started crying, throwing a fit, claiming I was ruining her reputation, that I was just jealous and paranoid. She accused me of spying on her, of invading her privacy. That's when I snapped. I told her I'd had enough of her lies, that I knew she'd been secretly selling off our property, draining our bank accounts, and hiding millions in offshore accounts. Her face went pale, and she started screaming that I had no right, that I was ruining everything we'd built. Her bitchy tone was unmistakable. She thought she could manipulate her way out of this, like always. I wasn't going to let her. I told her I was going to take everything she'd stolen, and I was going to make sure she paid for the betrayal. I also made her admit to the affair, to Jake and the others. She tried to deny it again, but I had the proof. The pictures, the messages, the bank statements, everything. I made her realize I wasn't bluffing. That moment felt like the turning point. For the first time, she looked genuinely scared. She knew I had her dead to rights. The emotional was brutal. I went from furious to numb, from wanting to scream to feeling hopeless. I'd loved her, trusted her. And now I saw her for what she truly was, an opportunist, a liar, a thief. It hurt so much to think about all those years I spent working around the clock to give us a good life, only to find out she'd been secretly destroying everything from the inside. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and mostly angry. How dare she do this? How dare she take everything I believed in and throw it away for some guy, for money, for her own greed? I wanted to destroy her, but I also knew I had to keep my head clear. So I started planning my next move. I knew I had to file for divorce, but I also had to protect what was left of the business and my assets. The offshore accounts were the biggest threat. If she succeeded in hiding or transferring that money, it would be nearly impossible to recover. I hired a forensic accountant and a private investigator to trace every dollar she'd hidden. I also contacted the court to prepare for a legal battle over the business and the assets she tried to secretly sell or hide. In the meantime, Jessica kept up her act, crying, begging, promising to change, accusing me of ruining her life. But I knew better. I saw her true colors. Underneath all the tears and lies, she was just a selfish woman who'd do anything to keep her money and her affair hidden. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. It was like waking up from a nightmare. I realized I was better off without her, that I'd be better off starting fresh, even if it meant losing everything I'd worked for. The pain of betrayal was still fresh, but I was determined not to let her win. Not this time. The day I finally decided to move forward was like stepping into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had all the evidence laid out, my lawyer had prepared the paperwork, and I was ready to take her to court. The main goal was to get control of the business, freeze her offshore accounts, and prevent her from draining any more money. I knew she'd fight dirty, and I had to be prepared for her to pull every trick in the book. Jessica's reaction to the legal threats was classic. She started bawling, calling me a monster, a control freak. She said I was ruining her life, that I was just jealous of her success and her affair. She said I was paranoid and that I was making everything up. But I had the proof, every text, every bank statement, every conversation. I handed her a stack of documents and her face turned a sick shade of pale. She tried to deny everything, but I wasn't having it anymore. I told her I was done playing her game. She could cry all she wanted, but I was going to get justice. The court date was set and I was nervous but determined. I knew she'd do everything she could to manipulate the system, to spin stories, to lie her way out of it. She'd already started blaming me for everything, saying I was controlling, insecure, that I'd been abusive. She threw in some tears, some fake apologies, trying to look innocent. I couldn't stand her manipulative face, but I stayed calm. I knew I had the truth, and that's what mattered. In the courtroom, I felt like I was fighting for my life. Jessica sat there, acting like she was the victim, but I laid out all the evidence. The offshore accounts, the property sales, the texts with Jake and Tyler, the secret emails. I could see her squirming under the weight of it all. When the judge asked her questions, she flailed, trying to deny, trying to lie her way out. But I had her cornered. The judge looked at the evidence and saw through her lies. It was clear she'd been stealing from us, hiding assets and cheating on me. The moment the judge announced the decision was a relief, but also a wake-up call. Jessica was ordered to return the stolen money, freeze her offshore accounts, and surrender her rights to the business. I was awarded full control, and the court ordered her to pay damages for the fraud and betrayal. I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because I finally had some justice, and anger because it was all so unnecessary. All those years, all the trust I'd put in her, gone in an instant. I looked at her as she sat there, defeated, tears streaming down her face. It was a bitter victory, but I knew I'd won the battle of integrity. After the court session, I felt drained but oddly lighter. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jessica would fight to the bitter end. She'd try to hide assets, drag things out in court, maybe even try to turn the kids against me. But I was prepared. I had the evidence, the support of my lawyer, and most importantly, a newfound clarity about who she really was. I realized I'd been holding on to an illusion of a perfect life, blinded by love and trust. Now I saw everything clearly. Jessica was no longer part of my future. In the days that followed, I started the process of rebuilding. I hired new managers for the business, made sure the offshore accounts were frozen, and began the long task of healing from this betrayal. I also reached out to my kids, told them the truth, and reassured them that I was still there for them. The pain of losing the woman I thought I knew was immense, but I knew I had to move forward. I learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to see the truth, and that betrayal cuts the deepest when it comes from someone you trusted with your life. But I was determined not to let her win. I'd rebuild. Stronger than before, and I'd never let anyone manipulate or betray me like that again. In the aftermath of the court battle, I felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. On one hand, I had taken back control of my business, secured the assets, and exposed Jessica's lies. On the other hand, I couldn't shake off the feeling of betrayal, of having been played for a fool for so many years. It was like waking up from a bad dream, only to find that the nightmare had left scars I'd carry forever. Still, I knew I had to keep moving forward. The betrayal had shattered my trust, but I refused to let it destroy me completely. I threw myself into rebuilding what was left of my life. I hired new managers, cleaned up the mess Jessica had left behind, and made sure the business was stable again. I also worked on my emotional health. I realized I'd been holding onto a lot of anger and hurt, and I needed to process those feelings. I started going to therapy, which helped me understand that I wasn't to blame for her actions, and that I deserved better than someone who lied, cheated, and stole from me. It was a tough process, but I knew I needed to heal, not just for myself but for my kids too. Jessica, of course, didn't go quietly. She tried every trick in the book to drag the process out, filing endless motions, accusing me of abuse, trying to turn the kids against me. But I had the court's support, and I made sure she couldn't manipulate the system anymore. I kept detailed records of everything: her lies, her attempts to hide assets, her bad-mouthing me to the kids. It was exhausting, but I knew I had to stay strong. I wasn't going to let her ruin what was left of my reputation or my family. As the weeks turned into months, I finally started to feel like I was getting my life back. I sold off some of the remaining assets she tried to hide: luxury cars, a second property in her name, and put the money into a trust for my kids. I also reevaluated my priorities. The betrayal taught me a lot about trust, greed, and the importance of watching out for myself. I realized that I'd been too trusting for too long, and that I needed to be more cautious about who I let into my life. One of the hardest parts was watching her try to spin everything in her favor. She'd call the kids, crying about how I was ruining her life, how I was controlling, jealous, and abusive. I knew better. I had all the proof of her lies and deception, but I also understood that she was trying to manipulate her way back into their good graces. I had to be honest with my kids, tell them the truth without bad-mouthing her, and let them see for themselves what kind of person she really was. It was a delicate balance, but I did my best. In the end, I learned a lot from this mess. I learned that trust is fragile and that betrayal can come from the most unexpected places. I also learned that I am stronger than I thought. I survived, I fought back, and I'm still standing. I don't regret fighting for what's right, even if it came at a huge emotional and financial cost. I want anyone who's going through something similar to know: don't ignore the signs, trust your instincts, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. You might lose some things along the way, but in the end, integrity and self-respect are worth more than any material possession or false sense of happiness. I still have a long road ahead, but I'm determined to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The betrayal hurt more than I can say, but it also woke me up. I'll never let someone manipulate or lie to me like that again. And if there's one thing I want others to take from my story, be vigilant, protect yourself, and never settle for less than the truth. Because in the end, that's all we really have: honesty, trust, and our own dignity. Looking back now, I realize that this whole ordeal was a brutal wake-up call. I thought I knew Jessica, thought I trusted her with everything. Turns out, I was just living in a bubble of my own making. The betrayal was so deep, so calculated, that it forced me to everything, not just my marriage, but my sense of self and what I value most. I learned that love and trust are fragile, and that people can surprise you in the worst ways when greed or selfishness takes over. The biggest lesson I took away is that you have to be vigilant, especially when it comes to your own life and your assets. I was for too long believing that if I worked hard and loved unconditionally, everything would be fine. But greed and deception don't care about love. They thrive in secrecy and lies. Jessica's actions proved that. She convinced me to sign over our business, promising it was for our future, only to secretly sell off assets and hide millions in offshore accounts. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, legal, and personal. Getting through the court case was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Watching her try to manipulate the system, hearing her cry crocodile tears, and seeing her try to spin stories to the judge was infuriating. But I knew I had the truth on my side, and that justice would eventually prevail. It was a long, exhausting process, and honestly, I don't think I could have done it without the support of my lawyer and a good support system. The court's decision felt like a victory, but it also came with a bitter aftertaste, knowing I'd been betrayed by someone I loved. Now I focus on rebuilding my life. I've sold off what I could, protected what assets I still have, and started trusting myself more. I've learned to listen to my instincts and to be more cautious about who I let into my inner circle. I've also become more aware of red flags, things I ignored or dismissed before. Most importantly, I've learned that no amount of material wealth can replace integrity and honesty. If someone is willing to lie, cheat, and steal from you, they aren't worth your trust. My relationship with my kids has become even more important. I've made a conscious effort to be honest with them, to show them that I'm still here for them, and that they don't have to pick sides. It's been tough, especially seeing Jessica try to manipulate their feelings, but I remain calm and patient. I want them to grow up knowing what honesty looks like and to understand that sometimes life throws you the worst curveballs. But you get through it by staying true to yourself. I guess what I want to say to anyone reading this who might be in a similar situation is, don't ignore the signs. Trust your gut. If something feels off, investigate. And most importantly, protect yourself, emotionally, financially, legally. Don't let anyone take you for a ride or manipulate you into giving away what's yours. Love is beautiful, but it's also fragile. Keep your eyes open, stay vigilant, and never settle for a lie when you deserve the truth. This experience has changed me forever. It's made me more cautious, more resilient, and more aware of what really matters. I don't hold grudges. Well, maybe just a little, because I know that holding onto anger won't serve me. But I do hold onto the lessons. I know now that betrayal can come from the people closest to you, and that sometimes you have to fight hard just to get back what's yours. I've come out of this battered but stronger, and I plan to keep moving forward, one step at a time.